Hello, everybody. I am here today with Esther from FitrWoman, and we're going to dive into all things menstrual cycle for athletes and how to use like super cool apps to tie this into your cycle and learn. So I'm going to let Esther introduce herself here, and we're going to learn a little bit about her background and how she got into this position.
Cool, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast. It's a complete honor. Um, so as you said, I work for FitrWoman, and FitrWoman is a menstrual cycle tracking app. I guess powered or created by Orreco, which is the company that I work for, I guess, as a whole. And at Orreco, we have placed in the last kind of 4 years a massive emphasis on the female athlete. So historically, actually, Orreco had a very male dominated kind of client list. But my colleague and now kind of lead on our female athlete program noticed this and kind of took it up with our CEO and said, where are all the women? So that FitrWoman kind of was born from that, and since then we've developed out our consultancy program. We work with kind of the big clients like the US soccer team, Chelsea women's soccer team, USA volleyball. Actually, I've just done some recent work with. So lots of different athletes, but also we're really passionate about our message. So FitrWoman is our app for anyone. You don't have to be an elite professional athlete to be able to have to use it. But so we want to kind of help disseminate all of our understanding through research and through kind of literature reviews, so that everyone can access it and understand more about their own unique female physiology. I actually started working with Orreco about 3 years ago now, as an intern. So I did my master's in applied exercise sport physiology.
Awesome.
And I kind of straight away kind of got into the female athlete, and my dissertation was actually looking at the menstrual cycle and endurance running.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's been a massive passion of mine since then. I think probably before then I didn't really have much understanding. I think, well, it's just not really hasn't been a done thing, right. Education is really lacking, and awareness. And so I was I trained as a professional dancer, and I feel Amazing. Kind of slightly let down by the lack of information about my body. I didn't really, I was using my body every day like an elite athlete does, but I had no idea what was going on. So I want to make a change for sure.
Amazing. And with your dissertation looking into menstrual cycles and runners, were you, out of curiosity, were you looking into like amenorrhea, like loss of menstrual cycle?
No, I was actually looking at the mid-luteal phase. So in the second half of your cycle, there's evidence to show that that increase in progesterone, which I'm sure we can talk about, can impact your your efficiency or your economy whilst running or cycling. So I was looking at that. So looking at that increase in body temperature that occurs and how that affects you physiologically. So
cool. Awesome. So I'm super excited about learning all about this. So you had mentioned it's not solely specific to endurance athletes or athletes in general. Anyone can utilize the app. I will say that I have played around with the app a little bit, but I'm going to, through this podcast, I'm going to kind of, in a sense, play dumb, and I'm going to ask some questions that I'm sure some audience members will be curious about. So with the app in there, the app is called FitrWoman, right? Yeah. And it is spelled FITR, which I think people should know. And with the app, are people logging, just tracking their cycle, and then there's educational material in there, or how does that work?
Sure. So when you log in, you'll be given, I guess the homepage brings you into which phase you're in, which is calculated using kind of when your last period dates were, and using kind of our algorithm created by our scientists. And so it tells you what phase you're in, and that phase is dependent on what is likely to be going on with your physiology. So what your hormones are probably doing around that time. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of a caveat because there's lots of individual kind of variation. So you've got to really, I think the whole aim of the app is to really inform you, give you the tools and the education to understand what is right for you and what your body goes through. So initially you get given this homepage of what's going on in the phase in terms of physiologically, so what your hormones are doing and what that might mean for different physiological systems. Also kind of nutrition, so what different nutritional considerations science says you might need to have in that phase. And then there's also some advice around different kind of exercise modalities or the things you might need to know, like a warm-up might be more advantageous in this phase, or actually your recovery might be a bit delayed, so make sure you cool down properly, or I don't know, wear some compression garments, that kind of thing. And then there's a recipe section as well, so to go with that nutrition component, there's some kind of our top foods and recipes depending on which phase you're in.
Awesome.
And then along with all of that information, there is this logging function. So you can log your bleeding date, so your period, but you can also log symptoms. And that's actually a lot of the work that I do with lots of different athletes is around kind of symptom management. Because I think, you know, there are different people that say, you know, you should definitely do this and you should definitely not do this, and then there are also science researchers that say, oh, we haven't got any evidence to say you can't take any of that advice. Well, actually, I think we sit somewhere in the middle. Like, you know, we totally believe that you should be able to perform, whether that be in sport or in your life, to your best at any one day. But we've got to manage any kind of symptoms or any, you know, work around those hormonal fluctuations in the cycle.
Amazing. So for those of our listeners, I think hopefully many of them are versed in the phases of the menstrual cycle, but could you give us a breakdown of the phases of the menstrual cycle?
Of course. And actually, like, I think some people do it slightly differently. So I think it's always good to go over what we mean. And so we break it down into 4 phases. Phase 1 for us is menstruation. So that's when you're bleeding, and that's when estrogen and progesterone, so these are the 2 hormones we're focused on specifically because they can affect your whole body. That's when they're at their lowest. So when you're bleeding, the lining of the endometrium is shed and the hormones are pretty low. If you move into phase 2, that's when you stop your period, and phase 2 lasts from that date until you ovulate. And throughout this phase, progesterone stays low, but estrogen increases up to a point. It's a pretty good phase for lots of people, actually, phase 2.
For performance?
Yeah, just for like general like well-being. You know, estrogen is a really positive hormone. It's linked with kind of serotonin release, dopamine release. So yeah, it's often like a very feel-good.
I like it.
Feel-good phase.
Feel-good phase. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And then after estrogen rises to a peak, it kind of drops off a little bit during ovulation, which is just 1 day. And then you move into phase 3, which is the kind of early luteal phase. And estrogen, whilst it's dropped, kind of then still stays relatively high, and progesterone starts to increase throughout this phase. And actually you might notice an increase in your body temperature. That's what the kind of the effect of progesterone. And actually fertility, that's how fertility trackers work. So they track your body temperature, your core body temperature. And then, so that's our phase 3. And then phase 3 lasts until about 5 days before your projected next cycle, so your predicted next period. And that's then goes into phase 4, which is where both progesterone and estrogen drop off in quite a steep decline in most females. And that's when kind of PMS symptoms are most common, because there's this, you know, decline of hormones, which is the body saying, oh, okay, we're not pregnant. We don't need this high level of progesterone because we're not going to try and keep a baby alive. So they drop off, and then the lining of the endometrium is shed, which is phase 1 again.
Awesome. Full circle. So you mentioned the body temperature. Is there a feature for people to log body temperature, or do you encourage
there
that?
There is at the moment. We would love, like, there's a note section. So at the moment, we, anything that there isn't an actual button for, we would say, we would definitely encourage people to, if they're tracking ovulation for some reason, or to definitely use that functionality. Excitingly, I've actually just come off a call about it. We are launching, hopefully this year, a new version of the app. So
awesome.
with lots of new features.
Amazing.
So yeah, we're hoping to enhance the experience, I guess.
Amazing. Super exciting. And so what about someone who's on hormonal birth control, like an OCP?
Good question. So at the moment, again, like, we don't have that as a separate user.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just important to acknowledge that you can still use the app, definitely. OCP users, IUD users still experience symptoms and potential fluctuations in hormones, particularly IUD users, or progesterone only contraceptive users, where ovulation still may occur and estrogen still may fluctuate. So I definitely would use the tracking functions as much as possible. I think it's just important to understand that some of the information might not be as relevant to you because your natural levels of hormone are suppressed by hormonal contraceptives, and particularly the OCP. I think just like read the information thinking, oh, that's really interesting, but it might not just apply to you, so take it with a pinch of salt.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. And so you mentioned certain phases of the cycle tend to be more or less symptomatic, potentially producing. What would you say those phases are?
I'd say phase 4 and phase 1 are where we see like most symptoms. You can get mid-cycle symptoms around ovulation, but the majority of symptoms occur kind of 5 days before you bleed and maybe running 3 days into your period. That's kind of an 8-day window. And I work with a lot of athletes. I do a lot of kind of questionnaire analysis. We ask about kind of menstrual cycle history with anyone that we work with, and that's those are the 2 phases where people cite having the most issues, I guess.
So I'm sure the listeners are probably like, I have all the symptoms, like, what do I do? So what are kind of the most common symptoms that you guys hear about? And then maybe we can dive into maybe why those are happening physiologically. And then of course, I'm a geek to the nutrition side. So whatever nutrition recommendations based off of those symptoms or phases of the cycle, let's dive into that.
Yeah, well, I think nutrition actually is, just before I start, is really important in all of this, because I think it's the place where you can make the most change.
Amazing.
And the most easy changes,
Right. I love to hear that. We can do it just with the food we put in our mouth. It's pretty incredible.
It's powerful.
So most common symptoms? So actually really handily, I co-authored a paper that came out last year, I think. It could have been 2 years, time flies. That we did a massive study and looking at Strava users. So we and it was across 7 different countries. We had over 14,000 respondents. So it's incredible data. And actually we looked at the prevalence of different symptoms, I think in a subset of 9,000, just over. And the most common symptoms were mood changes, or like kind of increased irritability / anxiety, fatigue and tiredness, lower back pain, menstrual cramps. They were definitely like the 4 most cited, and that's definitely what I see with athletes as well. Like that's
I think they're the most common ones.
Yeah.
And also they're really linked to other symptoms that we like log in the app, that you can log in the app, or other symptoms that you might have. So, heavy legs is one of our symptoms that you can log. That's really linked with fatigue. So yeah, they're often, you can kind of cluster some of them together. Now these symptoms occur most likely, it's actually really interesting. I've done a big piece of kind of reading literature about symptoms, and it's so frustrating because it's like we still don't really know why some of them happen, or like what it's like, well, with it's thought to, and it's like, well, I don't know why, but that's, the wonder of the body.
What are some of the things that we're still really digging on the research for?
Well, I think it's just it's hard, isn't it, to measure the exact mechanisms in a live, active human body. I think that's the thing, and we're always looking for, markers of something, or we know that if you take a chemical, so a hormone, and you put it in a rat, which is much easier to study and much simpler physiologically, then you can see there's an effect. Or you can see if you give someone, like often lots of studies are done in like postmenopausal women, and then you give them estrogen and things change, but that's still different to a premenopausal 28-year-old female who's going about her life. So I think that's the tricky thing.
Totally.
But there is like evidence to suggest that lots of those symptoms occur because the drop off in progesterone and estrogen, and the fact that your body's getting ready to shed this lining of the uterus causes this kind of an increase in inflammation. So we see an increase in prostaglandins, which are chemical messengers that are involved in the inflammatory pathway, and they occur as the uterus starts to contract. And so that level of inflammation and prostaglandin specifically can cause symptoms. So they can make you feel really tired. They can make you feel sick, nauseous. They can disrupt your sleep. They can, I guess impact a lot of different physiological systems. And then the drop off in hormones, and they're also linked, as with the drop off in hormones, to alters in kind of neurotransmitter release. So chemicals in your brain. And that's likely to be the cause of kind of mood disturbances. But then obviously we know that sleep's really important in mood, and if your sleep's disturbed, then that's going to affect how you feel too. So, very much linked.
Yeah. Like a snowball effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with the prostaglandins that you mentioned, is there anything nutritionally or physical, like activity wise, that causes someone to have greater prostaglandin release, or something that can manage the prostaglandins?
You can definitely manage them. So if you imagine, if you have in your mind prostaglandins equals like higher levels of prostaglandin in your system equals higher levels of inflammation. So in terms of diet, you want to think about pro-inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory food. So really kind of decreasing or limiting intake of pro-inflammatory food. So whether that's kind of really heavily processed foods, or set on like high saturated fat content foods, they're more pro-inflammatory. Whereas if you the amount of people I've told you just need to eat more fruit and vegetables.
It's a common thing.
But definitely like anti-inflammatory foods, so fruits and vegetables with lots of antioxidants, so loads of different color, as well as kind of oily fish, so omega-3s, nuts and seeds, but then also things like ginger, turmeric, all of those kind of things could also be really powerful in helping with that inflammation.
Awesome. That's so in that phase too, you mentioned heavy legs. Is
Yes.
there an impact or correlation with the prostaglandins pro-inflammatory increased state with trying to perform in sport?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because I think so objective measures of performance in research don't seem to change throughout the menstrual cycle. But I think that's because when it comes down to it, we're pretty good at overriding our signals, like our physiology.
Yeah.
And I think particularly athletes that have been studied, like elite athletes that have been studied, they're elite athletes because they can overcome extreme amounts of pain and suffer. So I think that's probably why we don't necessarily see it. But definitely, like, there's some really good evidence about looking at kind of perceived performance. And I think lots of people do feel like that is a particular time when they are affected. But I think, doing the things like trying to increase those anti-inflammatories or increase a little bit of sleep around that time, or really knowing that you've done recovery well, I think, particularly in the kind of, I'm a prime example. I'm not a professional athlete, but I run a lot. And I don't necessarily prioritize my recovery because I'm dashing in from my run onto a call or doing some work. So I think recovery is somewhere where we can really optimize, particularly in that time, to stop you from feeling like you've got heavy legs. So yeah, I think there are lots of things you can do. So it shouldn't, even if you're feeling these symptoms, there are things you can do to stop that from impacting your performance.
Yeah. So from the recovery front, specifically, you're saying have a little bit more emphasis on recovery during that phase 4 and 1.
Yeah. And even even towards the end of phase 3. So we know that progesterone, so this is actually a really interesting nutritional thing as well. So progesterone is linked with an increase in muscle protein catabolism, the muscle protein breakdown. So that's when, if you aren't kind of savvy around your protein intake, particularly in phase 3 and 4, you can feel like you've got heavy legs and your recovery is a bit delayed. So you might not feel fresh the next day. But if you, try to have protein before and after a workout in the right windows of time, then hopefully you can kind of mitigate against that.
Awesome. So with elevations of progesterone, we're getting greater protein breakdown.
Yeah.
And does this translate through like the 24-hour day, or are we talking like greater protein oxidation in workouts, or?
Yeah, it's throughout. So it's not just like during workout, it's kind of and it's been a while since I've read the literature properly, but but it's linked with just, you have to basically, if you go below that, like a negative protein balance, it's to do with the metabolism of protein and amino acids. We see like an increased release of amino acids, basically. So
so we don't want to be in a negative nitrogen balance, basically. Okay. And should someone increase their protein intake during these phases, or?
I think just be aware of having it very frequently throughout the day. So I know that's what kind of best nutrition practices do encourage, but it's easy. I think breakfast is the best example of this. So if I'm going to go out for a 60-hour run, 60-minute one.
You're impressive.
I wish I was going out for a 60-hour run. If I was going out for a 60-minute run, in the morning for breakfast, I might just have, a bagel with peanut butter. Great. Really good, like maybe with a bit of banana or blueberries or something. But actually, maybe in phases 3 and 4, I might need to have some yogurt with that, or, have a bit of protein before. I think breakfast is particularly, I don't know in America, but in the UK, protein isn't very like rich at breakfast typically. So I think that's just what you've got to be aware of. Are you splitting your protein up throughout the day? Are you having it before, and are you having it after a workout? And really getting it in that 30-minute window. And again, like I'm rubbish for this myself, and it's something that I really have to work on because I don't always feel hungry after a workout. But if you can get like protein in that 30-minute window, then you can like be assured that you're going to recover for your next workout.
Do you have any tips? Because this is a common thing that we see with our athletes too. And I would say definitely with running more so than cycling, for example, is after a run, a lot of our athletes just aren't hungry, like you're saying. So many times we suggest opting for a liquid variation as opposed to eating scrambled eggs or something like that. But do you have a go-to or suggestions in the app that are more tolerable maybe for someone who has a low appetite post?
We actually have like quite a lot of smoothie recipes. There are some in the app. We have so on the app as well, when you log in, there are lots of stories at the top, kind of little circles, look a little bit like Instagram stories.
Oh, cool.
And if you scroll along there are some kind of lots of different information about lots of different things, but there are also kind of phase-based smoothie suggestions. Awesome. And that's definitely something that we work with as well. If you have a fruit smoothie, you're ticking off 2 boxes because you're getting loads of antioxidants in there, and you're getting protein and probably some carbohydrate. So you're like winning.
Yes, winning.
And I think smoothies are great to sip. So perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And then you mentioned some other like not necessarily nutrition related recovery things. I think you said compression boots. Are there other tools or things that you suggest for people during this time in terms of recovery?
Yeah, definitely. Cold water is one of them. I think like there's different scientific advice about cold water immersion, because there's some thought that if you do it every single time, you're not going to have that adaptive response to exercise. But I think in phase 4 particularly, when you've got that high level of inflammation, that's not dealing with that inflammation, and the inflammation that happens after exercise is going to be more detrimental than to your adaptive response.
Okay.
Having some cold water, if that makes sense. So it's like almost like levels of superseding.
Yeah, I see.
But so cold water, and also there's a really interesting paper showing that females actually might respond better to cold water than males, which is that's a good thing.
Yeah.
if you can tolerate it.
Right.
So contrast showers are pretty good if you can't get into a nice bath.
Yeah. And is there a timing component to this in the sense, like, should it be post-workout? Like,
post-workout, within about an hour.
Okay.
Is ideal. Yeah.
And are we talking, you said cold shower alternating from hot to cold in your shower for 30 seconds?
Yeah. Build up to a minute each, build up to like 5 times 1 minute on, 1 minute off, that kind of thing. And you can also, a good tip is if you've got a shower that has like a retractable head, you can just do your legs so the rest of you doesn't get cold.
Okay. It's like if you just did a trainer ride or something like that, you could put
exactly.
it on your legs.
Obviously, if you've done enough of body workout, then maybe just do your whole body rather than just your arms.
Okay, awesome. I love that. And then any other, you said compression boots, those could be just post-workout or at some point during the day, or? Yeah,
exactly. Like throughout the day, like if you've got compression socks, then you can wear them throughout the day. Foam rolling, like all of that kind of, fascia release, that's really good as well, just to kind of keep the circulation going. And if you're lucky enough to be able to get a sports massage, then that's another option.
Amazing. Yes. Schedule your sports massages for your high hormone phase. Or
exactly.
Perfect. And then let's see. So we kind of covered some of the parts of the progesterone when it comes to recovery. But you also mentioned, you mentioned increase in core temperature. I think you said cramps, fatigue. Let's dive into one of those.
I mean, menstrual cramps that's probably not like progesterone related. They're very much like they're actually I think the hardest thing to kind of protect yourself against, because they are so like, you have your endometrium. So I watched this really interesting YouTube video the other day that was like a human cadaver, which if you're squeamish then don't watch, but it was like him showing you like this is the uterus and like the layers, and
wow,
it's so there, like if that contracts, that's obviously going to have an effect.
Wow.
So but there are some things you can do. So like really acutely, actually a hot water bottle is good. Having heat in that area is good. Again, anti-inflammatory diet, and some stretching and movement. So I totally appreciate that if you have really debilitating cramps, movement is the last thing you want to do. But some kind of gentle, maybe it's some like yoga twists, maybe it's going for a bit of a walk, maybe it's putting a really loud song on and having a little dance. Some kind of like aerobic movement is really good for that area. Awesome. I remember so distinctly, I was on a ballet summer course, and I had the worst cramps, and I was doubled over. I was like, I cannot do class, like, but because I was on a summer camp and I wanted to impress the teachers that I didn't know, I like still like got onto the bar and was like, oh, so painful. But within about 20 minutes, totally went. So yeah, it does have a great effect.
That's good. So do you think that is like, do you guys theorize that the endorphins, is it like almost like a brain distraction, or okay?
It's definitely the endorphins, and aerobic exercise does have an anti-inflammatory effect. So it's going to help.
Amazing. Any thoughts on why some people have really painful cramps and some have like never noticed even the slightest pinch?
I think some people just get dealt a bad card.
It is interesting.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different components. So there are things like, your diet, your sleep, your lifestyle, things that we know can influence severity of symptoms. But then there is this big genetic component. Some people are just more sensitive to either estrogen, or they're more sensitive to progesterone, or they're more sensitive to the changes in both of those hormones. And that also is going to affect which symptoms you experience more. And I think that's not to be it's not an excuse. You can't, like, I'm not saying this lightly. I think it does have a massive effect. We definitely see like, some athletes, you can tell they're just more sensitive to that progesterone, or people with endometriosis are more sensitive to estrogen, for example. So it's unfortunately you can't change that, but you hopefully can do some things about the like lifestyle components that can help
to mitigate some of the symptoms or the severity. Yeah, that's excellent. And so with the progesterone and elevation in core temperature, tell us what kind of consequences that might occur from that.
So the evidence shows that the progesterone increase can elevate your core temperature by about 0.5 degree. So it's not a degree centigrade, Celsius, and that is not Fahrenheit. It's not that much, but and actually there is some, but it just doesn't really affect your temperature per se throughout exercise. So whilst it can increase your temperature, like your core temperature throughout exercise or throughout the day, your body can cope with that. So your body just like shifts almost to cope with that higher level of high temperature. But sweating may be delayed. So sweating onset may be delayed or altered. So that might be the thing that kind of affects you. So there is some thought that exercise may be slightly impaired in the heat because of that, and because your body is working a bit harder. your breathing rate may increase as well, and in hot and humid environments, a little bit elevated breathing rate plus altered sweat responses are likely going to make you feel like it's harder. So the perception of effort might be increased. But there are exercise in the heat. You can really kind of help yourself out with that. So cooling strategies, whether that's having like a cold flannel or just a cold, like a slushy, so like tricking your brain almost. So as long as it's not going to be kind of detrimental to, like if you're doing an endurance performance and your core temperature is rising and you're trying to trick your brain, that's not very good, because you want your brain's natural response to that rise in core temperature. But if it's like a half an hour, 60-minute workout, cold slushies, menthol, that kind of thing, to just help you feel better, they're really useful tools.
Do you get athletes reporting that they feel like hotter during workouts?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so they're having a harder time cooling. They can feel that effect. And so little physiology lesson to like help me and maybe the listeners wrap our heads around this. So talk about science here and temperature degrees. So if we are running slightly warmer, and say the outside temperature is 60 degrees. I'm using Fahrenheit. I have no idea what that is in Celsius.
No worries. I have
cooler than our core temperature, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. So if we're slightly warmer, and so we're having a harder time cooling ourselves and sweating because we're running warmer, or is there another fluid balance issue going on as well physiologically?
Just because your body temperature is increased slightly. So in temperate conditions, so anything that isn't considered particularly hot in terms of a climate, you're fine. You probably won't notice it.
I see.
It's only when you've got that added like external stressor of the external temperature being increased, and potentially humidity as well, that
gotcha. So when it's talk about Kona, I think about Ironman Kona, right? It's like could be 100+ degrees. It's very humid. If your temperature, the end goal or the goal is always to minimize the temperature, your body temperature from increasing, right? And so if it is already running slightly warmer, now your gap to manage that change in temperature is even less so, essentially. So
you want to try to like decrease your core body temperature before you start, which I appreciate is hard in Kona. Like, if you're going to swim first, you can't do anything about that. But having like cooling flannels or cold drinks on the bike, that kind of thing, that's pretty important.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it is super interesting with the temperature piece too, and I'm sure that probably ties into like sleep, right? If you're running a little bit warmer.
Good thought train. That's exactly that's exactly what research says.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we sleep, we want to be in a cool room. Isn't the body is naturally should naturally drop the core temperature to achieve sleep, right? Yeah. So, if we're running a little hotter, and then is there anything going on when it comes to the hormones impacting melatonin production? Have I heard that before, or?
I haven't seen anything about melatonin per se. There is, I was reading kind of a big systematic review around the menstrual cycle and sleep recently. There is some evidence that it can alter your kind of REM lengths of sleep. It's that premenstrual window is where we do see like perception of sleep decreases.
Interesting.
And just kind of altered onset of sleep. Again, we're not really sure exactly why that. It's still to be determined. Maybe come back in like 15 years and we might know.
We'll schedule you for a podcast in 15 years. So with that, so we're running a little hotter, a little bit less REM. And is REM sleep where we are doing our muscle repair too? Is that, or?
Yeah, REM sleep is Yeah, I think deep sleep is very much a bit muscle repair, but REM sleep, you definitely, it's really important for kind of memory
Oh, cool.
consolidation. And yeah, I mean, my science definitely wave is on that. It's something that I had to keep updating myself on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's obviously when you dream, so your brain is very, very active.
Yeah.
But yeah, physiologically, yeah.
So if someone is feeling super fatigued during that phase 4 or maybe late phase 3, should they be trying to spend more hours in bed? Should they take advantage of naps?
I think if you feel like your sleep's disturbed in those phases particularly, or you're feeling a bit tired, yeah, I think naps are a really good tool if you can. Obviously not everyone has like a job or a lifestyle that can allow them to nap, but you know, like 20 to 30 minutes in the early afternoon is a really good kind of top up if you think that you're not getting enough sleep. Yeah, and I think there's also the really important thing of like, just be kind to yourself as much as possible. If you are feeling really heavy legged and tired, you haven't slept well, like, what is going to actually benefit you? Kind of, is it going to be that hard interval hit session you were going to do, or is it actually like, you know, some yoga and a light jog or a little spin on the bike, or maybe you just need a rest? Like, I think I'm not, when we never want to say you can't train, don't train, but maybe you just need to be a bit smarter about it and work out what is actually right for you. So yeah, that's would be my biggest thing. If you feel rubbish, then listen to your body.
Yeah. What do you think about people who are feeling tired during that phase, wanting to go for like another cup of coffee? Should they not do that? Should they do that?
Yeah, I'd say don't. I love coffee myself, but actually we know caffeine can exacerbate symptoms. And if you have caffeine, like caffeine only has a very long half-life, so it's going to stay in your body for a while. And if you have disrupted sleep, even a cup of coffee at 2 p.m. could affect you. So yeah, stay to like limit yourself to kind of 2 caffeinated drinks a day at max.
I love it. I love that suggestion. That's where my head usually goes when someone asks me that. So in terms of training, like during training, nutrition or hydration, should there be any changes to that during the changing phases of the cycle?
Yeah, so there's some evidence around like estrogen is alters your carbohydrate metabolism, basically, your carbohydrate substance use. So when estrogen is low, so phase 1 and phase 4, you're primarily a kind of a carbohydrate oxidator. You primarily use carbohydrate as your kind of fuel source. So if you imagine when your hormones are low like that, we're most similar to a male of all the times in our menstrual cycles. And males, we know, are really good at oxidating carbohydrates. That's why, you know, lots of the nutritional advice out there about endurance efforts is, you know, 60 grams of carbohydrate in an hour, etc. We know that females are actually a lot more better at fat oxidation, and we rely more on fat as a fuel source, and that is when estrogen increases. So phases 2 and 3, we up to kind of intensities of 70% of max, we are using more fats as fuel.
Okay.
Once you get into that high intensity, we still prefer carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is obviously like a high intensity fuel source. But yeah, that's what kind of research shows. Now, if you are, say you're in phase 1 and you want to do kind of a longer effort, then it's to counteract your faster use of carbohydrate. That's when kind of carbohydrate loading is is pretty good. And then in phases 2 and 3, if you're looking at doing kind of high intensity, then taking on carbohydrates during efforts is advised. It can help kind of counteract the effects of altered substrate utilization. But yeah, that's what nutritionally, but it's quite nuanced, that. And I think, you know, we still need to determine really whether that is the best way to do it. Some people might feel great and actually that really works for them, but again, it's very individual.
Yeah. Do you, with that kind of inter-individuality, I mean, I've seen different recommendations when it comes to the during training or even pre-training carbohydrate dosing. Like you're saying, much of those values came from research that was primarily done on men that are really good at oxidizing carbohydrates. So I think like one of the references I'm thinking of is like the 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrates per kilo pre-training. And kind of, I've seen different literature saying like opt for the 1 gram per kilo if you have 1 hour to digest, 2 grams per kilo if you have 2 hours. What do you think about that range or that suggestion? Is that?
I think we would still probably, I'd say going up to 4, that sounds like an incredible amount to have. But, so I'd say you probably 1 to 2 would probably be what the nutritionists that I work with would recommend. I think those numbers are helpful to give a ballpark, but I think you've obviously got to, that we can't just say, oh no, you don't need any carbohydrate, because we know that that's not true. So I think 1 to 2 is probably a good place to sit.
Yeah. Do you, with any of the recommendations in the app, is there any time, because this is a common thing we see with our athletes, suggest during certain phases that women go into training sessions fasted?
No. No, and I feel incredibly strongly about fasted training. I understand that fasted training can have a place. I understand that a lot of males practice fasted training. And if you want to do it, then make sure you do it with a supervised kind of nutritionist or dietitian. But we know that females are much more sensitive to cortisol. And if you train fasted, in the particular, like you're going to be training in the morning, which is when cortisol levels are higher. If you train without any fuel, you're going to spike that cortisol even higher. And we know that high levels of cortisol in your blood system constantly can affect your menstrual cycle in a negative way. So it can either affect your symptoms, so you can have more symptoms, or it can cause your cycle to be elongated or to your periods to completely stop. So maybe I'm controversial, but I don't recommend females do fasted training.
Amazing. I think I have to ask these questions so people can hear it from somebody else's mouth and not just mine all the time. So, and I did not pay Esther to say that.
No, definitely
not. So, I mean, this is a super informative podcast. I'm sure we could ask you a ton more questions, but I think we have to tie it up here because we want to appreciate, accommodate for your time here. So, moving forward, if people want to find FitrWoman, they can find that in the App Store, or?
Yes, FitrWoman is in the App Store and Google Play Store, FITR, as you said earlier, woman. Or you can go onto our website and the links are there as well. So that's www.fitrwoman.com. We also have Twitter and Instagram, and that's @FitrWoman. So it's all relatively simple.
Amazing. And we'll put that in the show notes for anyone who wants to check those out. So thank you again so much for your time. We learned a bunch of nuggets here. We can ice bath during that phase 4 and end of phase 3 and get a little bit more recovery and naps, all that stuff as well. I'm all for it. Thank you so much, Esther. It was great speaking with you.
No, thank you very much for having me.